Hello, everybody. Welcome back to ADHD Power Tools. Today, as usual, we have Brooke Schnittman with us, and we have Jeff Copper, who's revisiting us over here. Jeff, it's good having you.
Thanks for having me on. I enjoyed your guys' work, and I enjoy working with you, so it's a pleasure.
Of course, of course. And for those who
Thank you so much.
our new audience, Jeff, can you kind of reintroduce yourself? What do you do in the ADHD space?
Yeah, so I'm actually a trained life coach from the Coaches Training Institute and the ADD Coach Academy. I specialize in life coaching, really, for those that are neurodiverse, more specifically ADHD. Been doing it since like 2007, back when dinosaurs roamed the earth. As a result of that, I over the years, I have my podcast, Attention Talk Radio, my video channel, Attention Talk Video. I do a lot of speaking. I'm on the editorial board of Attention Magazine, so I'm kind of like all things attention.
Awesome, awesome. And today, what we want to talk about is emotional self-regulation. Jeff, I want to ask you, how would you describe that? And in terms of the fight, flight, and freeze.
Well, so I think just to lay this out is, as of right now, emotions are not a part of the diagnostic criteria in the DSM. Now, they were before 1970. We're not exactly sure why they were taken out. We believe it's because they weren't really measurable, but you talk to anybody, any of the foremost experts in the world, they all agree that emotional self-regulation is a big part of ADHD. And more ADHD is being reframed as an executive function impairment. And depending on who you talk to, I'm a big fan of Dr. Barkley's model. Emotional self-regulation is an executive function, along with self-awareness, self-restraint, the ability to think in your head, self-regulation kind of in general. So fundamentally, it is an executive function. And I like to think of an emotion just really kind of, there's lots of words out there. Sometimes it's easy just to synthesize it down. An emotion is a reflexive reaction. And I use the word reflex, like if you stick something down your throat, you're going to gag, or if the doctor hits your knee with that hammer, your knee's going to swing out, or if you're going to fall, your hands are going to reach out to brace yourself. So a reflexive reaction is an automated thing, and reflexes are really kind of good. But I like to think of it as a emotion as a reflexive reaction. Now, a feeling is the physical manifestation of an emotion. So when you say I feel, that is an emotion. All right. Now, as a survival mechanism, okay, hardwired in our brain, it's the survival thing is when you feel threatened with your life, right? You feel like there's a bear chasing me, right? You feel that reflexively, you go into fight, flight, or freeze, okay? It's a defense mechanism. What's important to understand is when you reflexively go into that, your thinking brain is taken offline. So your prefrontal cortex is the thinking part. The more primitive brain is down here. And when you feel it, it reflexively kind of takes you into that. And it's real important is when you're there, you're not even, you can't remember what you're supposed to do because it is all primitive. Now, first responders do a lot of training. You know, everybody don't panic. Let's calm down. The idea is you got to pause and you got to bring your thinking brain online so you can think a little bit more rationally. And so the fight, flight, or freeze response is a survival thing. Now, the thing, how this manifests a little bit, and I know we're going to get back in a second, is people with ADHD, if you feel threatened, okay, feel, it doesn't even mean that you are threatened. It's just, if it feels threatening, you'll have a tendency to fight, become paralyzed, that's the freeze, or just run like hell. And so it's really kind of important because people with ADHD, they struggle with self-regulation. Two things you got to regulate if it's an impairment. One is the attention that most people focus on, but most people don't realize emotional self-regulation is as much a part of ADHD as attention. In fact, the people that struggle more with emotional self-regulation, it thwarts the regulation of attention. Like you have to regulate that first before you can actually do the attention side. Make sense?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I would also like to add just the piece that like fib, right? So if your child or someone in a relationship close to you gets afraid just based on your mere presence, right?
Yes.
Or, you know, your reaction to them, they might lie. So that's their emotional response
Yes.
to you being there. So yes, I completely agree.
And what I'm describing, there's a lot of people to describe. Some people talk my amygdala is hijacked. There's a flooding feeling or whatever, but really, I think it's really important when you think of an emotion at an extreme is that you go into a primitive mode. It's a reflexive reaction and you're not thinking in like objectively, you're
Yes.
thinking emotionally. And so it's kind of important. I think we'll talk a little bit more about that later, because also understand when people say I feel, they actually are skipping over the thinking part. They're jumping to conclusions. As much as they think they're thinking, they're actually not.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So a feeling, though, doesn't that come from a thought, which then comes from a circumstance?
So think of it like this. Again, I don't want to everybody think emotions and feelings are not bad. They're really important survival mechanism. Like when I was a kid, I stuck my finger in a light socket, right? And I got electric, whatever. You can take a look at something and go, I don't feel like that's good. Like I sense danger. Like you might see red in the
Sure.
wild or whatever. It's a survival mechanism. But the thing about it is people don't question their feelings. Okay. So a lot of times a person with ADHD will say, I feel like that person is mad at me, or I feel like that person is rejecting me.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Well,
and that's the story that they're creating.
well, it might feel that way because maybe you were in an interaction and you told a joke and the other person didn't laugh at it. Well, it doesn't mean they're rejecting you or they don't like you. Maybe they just have a different style of humor. But that feeling that they're having, and you're drawn in the past, I'm jumping to the conclusion that they're rejecting me, they don't like me. If you were to stop and objectively look at it, might not be the case. Again, it doesn't mean they're rejecting, they just have a different sense of humor. Or as I described, I was backpacking with a bunch of Boy Scouts one time, and there was a copperhead snake, namesake, off in the distance. It was safe. It was in distance. But the next day, I'm walking down the path, and all of a sudden, I'm looking down, and all of a sudden, I bring my thinking brain online objectively, and I'm like, that's not a snake. It's a stick sitting in a thing. And so that demarcation is really important because it's the difference between objectively looking at the facts right now as opposed to the past. There's a lot of ways to describe this. Fear, forget everything and run. False evidence appearing true. Thinking's difficult. That's why people judge, right? Or is the only exercise you get in a day jumping to conclusions. All of those are vernacular that we have to illustrate is when you're saying that you feel, you're jumping to conclusions. Again, there is some validity for this because literally you can have an experience that your feelings are coming around. But one of the things that we'll talk about a little bit is far too often people don't question their feelings. And your feelings deceive you quite frequently. But people with ADHD, they don't stop and think, which is actually a part of the problem. Thinking inside your head, if you have ADHD, is effortful and difficult. So there's the urge to escape. So it's actually easier to judge than it is to actually solve the problem.
Absolutely. I completely agree. I like to think of stop, select, and simplify. So stop yourself in the tracks. Like, what are you starting to feel? Because sometimes physically things are happening to you and you don't even realize why they're happening. So once you start getting that stress response or that feeling somehow, then what's causing that? Are you anxious or are you fearful about something? Are you allowing negativity? Are you not setting boundaries? What's going on? Lack of sleep, whatever. And then figure out, where you need to go rather than just going. You bring
up a really good point, is that when you are in an emotional state, you don't really know that you're in an emotional state, and your emotions are unpredictable. So what's the trigger to let you know that you're emotional?
Exactly.
The general guideline is your body doesn't lie. So, as Brooke, you go to the body, like, what does my body feel like? I did an interview in 2014 with Sesame Street. And back then,
cool.
season 43.
My daughter's obsessed with Elmo right now.
Season 43 was all about self-regulation. The whole season was me want cookie, me way. But we were talking about emotional self-regulation. And to kind of support what you're saying, Brooke, is what they were using is the Muppets. To help preschoolers discern the difference between emotions, between maybe anger and frustration and, sadness or whatever, because they needed to be able to name it. And then they would help the
like
kids.
The zones of regulation.
Yeah. And where does sadness show up, or where does frustration? In my neck, in my chest. So that if the preschoolers could feel it, that's the trigger. Hey, I'm frustrated. So now they know they're at a frustrated state. That's the pause. Then the idea is they want to belly breathe to get more oxygen into your brain to bring your prefrontal cortex online, and you count to 3 to distance yourself from the trigger, and then you go to talk to somebody. So what you were just describing is textbook the way you manage emotional self-regulation. First, you have to recognize that you're in that state and often listen to the body to catch yourself. Then pause, take those deep breaths, and then bring the thinking brain on, begin in like, okay, what's going on here? Why is this? Is that really a snake or a stick or kind of whatever? And it's one of the things that I describe. It's the easiest thing for me to describe for people with ADHD. It's the most difficult for them to execute. And what I just described is really ubiquitous. It's the same process. People use different words at different times and places, but I've studied this a lot. Again, you got to be self-aware enough to feel it in your body, to catch yourself and pause, bring your thinking brain online, be more objective as opposed to reactive. And again, it's quite challenging for people with ADHD.
Yeah. And something else, if you guys don't mind me sharing, I was working with a neuroscientist, and she was mentioning putting a bell on a door or a cabinet, wherever. And every time you open that door or cabinet, then you just catch your thought, because we very often, as we were just talking about, just go, 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 go. So it's another strategy to just think about like, what was I just thinking? Let me stop and pause. And it's just that bell or that alarm, like that Pavlov theory of reminding yourself about, to stop.
And you can go a step further as you stop, not just think about that, but also take your emotional weather report. Like, where am I? I'm partly sad, partly happy, as a means to just to stop and check in with your body to bring that awareness up so that you're more mindful of it. Like, it's just like an athlete practicing stuff so that when we're in the middle of the game, you're more apt to catch yourself. And so, yeah, it's an awesome exercise for people with ADHD.